Thanks for joining us once again on the BC City Connection podcast. This is your official podcast, the City of Battle Creek, connecting us with what's going on at City Hall and in town. And this one is a very interesting conversation. We're going to talk today about Battle Creek fire stations. Joining us now is City Manager Rebecca Fleury and Fire Chief Bill Beaty. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Richard.
Nice to be here.
I think if we were to try and offer just an umbrella statement about what this is about, it is the notion that we might have some antiquated facilities in town as it relates to fire stations, and we have to look into that. Is that fair to say?
Very fair to say, Richard. And Chief's got all the specifics probably better than I do. But when you have at least two fire stations that were built in the early 1900s, antiquated is a good word to use. I think when we started these conversations, it was more about, the health and safety of our firefighters and making sure that they have the right tools to provide the very, very vital service that they do to the community. And so, yeah, I think that's fair. I think that we're at a moment in time where we know we need to make investments in our 6 fire stations, but all 6 of them may not be viable to continue to service, a modern day fire department.
Boy, that sounds serious when you phrase it that way. Chief, how do you react to that? That's quite a statement.
Oh, absolutely. Rebecca hit it spot on, though. It's, we have to evaluate our service to the community. We have to be responsible in how we provide that service to the community, operationally and fiscally as well. So as we look at the buildings that we have, we look at our structure, our layout, our deployments, where everybody's located. We have to take all of those things into account. There's been various engineers brought in, consultants brought in, have studied the buildings. They've looked at our response models. That I would say there's been 4 different groups have come in and taken a peek. Some of them were one-time specially brought in for a purpose. Others were brought in. It's done every 5 years to evaluate our system. So we take all the information that comes from them and we analyze that, and we look at our community itself. Just because they're consultants doesn't mean they're the end-all be-all, of course. They provide recommendations to us, and then we look at our own information, we look at our finances, we look at the community with the growth, and on and on and on. And that's what's led us to these recommendations that we're working on putting together.
Well, and it's interesting too. What was your gut, Chief, when you came here? You've been elsewhere, you've seen facilities elsewhere. When you came to Battle Creek, did you look around and say, well, some of this might be in need of an upgrade?
A little bit, looking at it from a fire administrator standpoint, that was absolutely something that I looked at. But being a firefighter for as long as I have, I was also kind of in awe at the 2 really neat old buildings that we have that are still in use today. Such beautiful structures, for what they are still today, 120 some years later. The fire geek in me a little bit was just excited to see the old buildings. We still have haylofts. It was cool to me as a firefighter to see that. So trying to weigh both in my role here definitely was something that I looked at when I first got here.
Yeah, that kind of frames the challenge, right, Rebecca? This is modern versus how cool is this?
It is true. And I think, again, we looked at it, I'll be the first to admit, that we have not done as a city the best job in upkeep of our fire stations. Not because we didn't want to, and not because we don't recognize the amazing and professional department, men and women of our department, and the fact that they live 24/7 in those buildings. Mm-hmm. A lot of it had to do with budgetary. A lot of it had to do with breakdown of communication about needs. You know what I mean? When we talk about that 6 stations that house, all of the men and women, and, I think we didn't do a good job of asking them what we might need to think about first and what the priorities are versus also listening to what the community thinks the priorities are. And then, of course, our elected officials. So, when we've had some tough conversations with the firefighters, and yes, the city did admit we haven't done our best job keeping up with the fire stations, the maintenance and ongoing operational needs of buildings that, Station 2 was built in 1904 and Station 3 was built in 1902. When you think about that, they designed those for a wagon and horses, not for a 24/7 operation where, we have men and women living in these facilities. And now some of the things we know from a research perspective is, and the chief will talk about this more eloquently than I, but just the sheer separation of them with the gear and with the actual apparatus, those two stations, there's no way to have the complete separation that we need. And so, the chief is right. We're good at studying things in municipalities. And in this instance, we needed to use those past studies as well as the recent engineering studies that we did in 2022 that finished in 23 to actually inform our decisions going forward. And when an engineering specialty looks at you and he says or she says the very same things that some of those earlier studies says, that it is not a good use of taxpayer dollars to put money and invest in fire stations that were built in 1902 and 1904.
Well, that makes a whole lot of sense, doesn't it, Chief? Because you know what the modern facilities use and need. And so this is a contrast, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. And, we look at it from the fire side, the fire department side or the fire service side. There's a science to the fire service. It's not just a matter of showing up and having the right equipment. All of those things play into it. The right number of people being in the right locations. All of those things play into it. But there's a science to all this. Modern fire stations are designed with the flow inside the building, and Rebecca started to talk about it a second ago. There's the safety aspects of where the firefighters' gear and the equipment is kept, where it's not kept and things like that. But there's science to it now. We design buildings that the workflow firefighters can get from whatever they're doing out to the apparatus quicker. And we put things in place that they can get out the door quicker, because time in our business, time is a very big thing. Fires expand, over time, exponentially. People with medical issues, with emergent medical issues, obviously those don't get better until they have some sort of intervention to help address those. So time is a big thing, and that's a big part of the science of what we do, that workflow. We lay firehouses out a certain way so the firefighters can get in and out to go do their thing. And then, as Rebecca was talking about a moment ago, in the 1800s and early 1900s, there weren't female firefighters. We need to take that into account. There's a lot more females in the fire service today in general. So you have to think of things of, what if one of my female firefighters decides she wants to be a mom and they start a family? We have to provide a workplace that can help them facilitate that can help them, take care of the things they need to do as a new mother, so on and so forth. All those things, it's a science in the design and the deployment of modern buildings.
Let me just ask this, Chief, is the way things are now jeopardizing safety somehow for your crew or the citizens? You talk about the science of it, the response time, and how critical that is. So obviously, these advancements have meant better response times. Is there a safety concern the way we have things now?
A concern, I don't know that I would go so far as to say it's a concern, but it's definitely something that we need to pay attention to going forward. And Rebecca said it as well, and so will I. The men and women at the Battle Creek Fire Department are amazing. They do more with less every single day because that's what we do. So to call it a safety concern, I don't think so. I think we've made adjustments as best we could. But again, as Rebecca has talked about, we're looking at going forward. We probably need to do more. We know we need to do more and do better than we have in the past, but we don't think anybody's in jeopardy now. Station alerting systems for a long time, they were literally a gong. Think of a boxing bell. They were a gong that's really loud and comes up out of nowhere. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, getting startled out of sleep, that's a health concern. So folks adapt to that. But what we're looking at going forward are modern systems where the tones come up and they gradually increase. The lights come up very dim and they gradually increase to kind of bring folks out of that sleep so we can go off and do our thing without still being all frantic from that bell that just woke you out of nothing.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So, Rebecca, you talked about how this is a situation in which maybe we didn't keep up with everything we needed to, budgetary concerns and that sort of thing. So why now? Why is now the right time?
Well, I think when you bring experts in to take a look at it, and there is and really it was one before 2015, 2015, and 2022. So when you see the theme that isn't changing, it makes you say to yourself, okay, we can't change the past, but we can make a difference going forward. And I think as the chief and I have gone out and talked at the stations, we're embarking on a community conversation at all of our stations to just share what we're thinking and to gather input and use all of that to ultimately make a recommendation to the city commission. But why now is that it doesn't make sense to continue put taxpayer dollars in two of our stations. The others need help. We've been very reactive. Station 4 was closed for a tremendous amount of time because we had to be reactive when there was a hole in the roof and we had to move everyone out. And we're trying to get us out of the reactionary mode into a proactive mode. But at the heart of all of this, we understand that fire stations are neighborhood pillars. They always have been. As the chief said, early on, they were looked at as that neighborhood hub for a variety of things, as the chief said. And we understand that, neighborhoods have identity in their fire stations. And, the closer you are to a fire station, you have this feeling that, you're never going to not get somebody to come and help you when you're having a bad moment. And I appreciate that and respect that. But again, then I have to weigh that with the resources that are available and getting us to a new baseline. And so, Richard, we finally saw, the most recent engineering study, and we said to ourselves, we've got to start somewhere. So, I had conversations with the firefighters, with the city commissioners, with staff. And that's when we kind of engaged Cody Newman of Driven Design. And I'll talk a little bit about Cody's work with us, but not losing the feeling of neighborhood connection to fire stations, and then trying to figure out what are all of these studies telling us about where our stations are located, and are we deploying from the right areas and in the right amount of time within that range that's acceptable from a fire perspective. And look, the two oldest stations, we looked very different in 1902 and 1904. I mean, that was before the city and the township merged. So, we have some stations that were part of the old Battle Creek Township, and some of the stations were part of the city of Battle Creek. Well, when we merged, they didn't really move. They just stayed where they're at. We joined as one department and we kept deploying out of them. But, what Chief Beaty and I have talked about is the studies are telling us that really they're not located in the right places either, not all of them. So, there's a ton of data we go through, but frankly, neighbors don't want to hear that. They want to hear, well, why aren't you going to keep investing into the station that's in my neighborhood? And we're doing our best to share why. that a proposal is coming forward that includes the closure of one of our stations. Actually the closure of 2 stations, but a rebuild of one of them. And so why now we've hit that time? It's time for us to reset the base with our fire stations. That's why the proposal includes investment into 5 of our 6 stations, with one of them being proposed as closed. And then once that's done, I mean, again, we're not done. You know, we see this as a potential 4 year, it'll take us 4 years probably to get through the majority of what is being proposed. But then we've better make sure that we have a plan that at that year 5, we still are doing what we need to do to make sure that we're keeping current with the maintenance and operational needs of the facilities, the fire stations. So, you know, standing in front of a neighborhood to say, right now, we are proposing that your station close. That's difficult. What Chief and I we can give them all that information. But they're passionate about it. We're doing our best to be good listeners and reminding everybody that ultimately this will be the city commission's decision. We are trying to gather as much feedback as we can, not only from the experts, because they're great, but as Chief Beaty said, you don't take everything that the experts tell you. You've got to tailor it and taper it for what makes sense for Battle Creek. That's what we're trying to do with what we're sharing in the proposals right now.
Well, a couple things popped in my mind as you said some of that. 1902, 1904, the environs were much less expansive then than they are now, I presume. And here we are still using the same station. So just think about that for a second. The other thing that popped in my mind was the notion that the fire stations are part of the neighborhood. And I suspect that people have a sense of security about knowing that there's a fire station around the corner. So this is something else that comes into play, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And you know what the chief and I have been trying to say is that you are still going to get the men and women of the Battle Creek Fire Department coming to your neighborhood with when you're in probably one of the worst calls you have to make in your life. I've got to have the fire department or an ambulance or whatever. So yes, we have to recognize that. But also we have to recognize that we have a very large city geographically. So when you think about that, the fire department has to go from basically, you know, Lakeview Square Mall all the way to the edges of right before the line of Bedford Township in the city of Battle Creek. That's a heck of a long way to have to go, you know, if something's on fire or you've got a medical emergency. That's why we will continue to evaluate where they're located and what our response times look like for a variety of calls. And so, yeah, you're right. We have to recognize that. And what we've talked about in our community conversations is, and I don't think I've said it yet, but right now the proposal is to close Station 3, which is in our Post-Franklin neighborhood, and to close Station 2, but rebuild a new Station 2 very similar to that footprint where it is right now on Washington. But what we've said to the neighbors is, just because they may not be fire stations anymore doesn't mean they can't still be a valuable location for the neighborhood. There are no plans to demolish either one of those. They couldn't be actually, because they're historic structures and they're beautiful. They just don't function as a fire station, and they shouldn't function as a fire station anymore because we're so limited based on their historical place, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to work with the neighborhood about what the next life could be for those buildings if the commission decides, you know, that this is the right proposal and the right next steps. And so we want to ensure the neighborhoods that we will work with them to find its next life. And you know what? We have been talking about this for almost a month now. We've already had people ask about, hey, I would love to make that a restaurant. I would love to use that for housing, mixed use. I mean, a lot of people have interest. And what we're saying right now is no decisions have been made. We're simply having the conversations right now and using the information gathered to educate and inform the commission when we get in front of them with a recommendation of a final proposal. So we're still in the very early phases, but that will never change the fact that we recognize the importance of the presence in the neighborhoods, and are doing our best to be good listeners, but then also share why we feel these changes should be made, and they should still expect the same high level of service from the Battle Creek Fire Department.
Chief, does this affect staffing? I mean, what's proposed? Let's say, for the sake of argument, it goes forward. 3 is closed, 2 is rebuilt. Maybe there's some location discussions. But overall, do you expect the staffing part to change?
No, sir, I do not. That's been something that we've talked about. Rebecca and I have talked about at length. We've talked about our two labor groups inside the fire department, our internal stakeholders there. Our deployment of personnel per day is based on some of that science stuff. It's based on national standards for responding to certain types of calls, and we're right there. So trying to go below that, none of us think that's a good idea, including Rebecca. So the plan is to keep the same number of firefighters, keep the same number of apparatus. We're just going to take engine 3 out of station 3 and relocate it to station 1. So we would have 2 apparatus then operating out of station 1, along with our battalion chief. So it's the same number of personnel and equipment on duty each day, every day. It's just going to be from some different locations.
And when Rebecca made the comment about horses and buggies, that means, we didn't say this all the way through, but that means that modern apparatus don't fit there, do they?
No, it's they're way bigger. There's no way to put it. There's no way to soften that. Modern fire apparatus are very large, heavy vehicles. They're pretty specialized vehicles, and they're expensive vehicles. So last year when we got a new engine 3, actually, it was its turn to be replaced. And the day we brought it in to put it in service, we had to do some modifications to the apparatus just to get it in the building. This was a brand new $800,000 fire engine that we had to loosen some bolts and turn some stuff over just so it would fit in the door.
Well, you can imagine that.
Older building.
Yeah, right. How many years do you get out of one of those, mind you?
Generally speaking, it's a total of 25. The industry standard, the NFPA standard, is 10 years of frontline service and another 15 of reserve status. Although for here in Battle Creek, we have 2 reserve apparatus. They're in service all the time. You do preventive maintenance, you got to change the oil, check the tires, check the brakes and things like that. When you have 6 frontline apparatus that take a week or 2 each time, and you're doing it quarterly, that's a lot of time that those reserve apparatus, they're not really reserves. They spend a lot of time in the front line as well. But generally speaking, it's 10 years of frontline and another 15 of reserve status. And, with good maintenance, good quality, fire engines are built different today than they were 25 years ago. That industry is different now as well. So keeping a rig from 25 years ago for 25 versus a more modern rig for another 25 going forward, they are looked at way different because they're built better. They're looked at with that science and with the modern technology and things like that. So even that is a shift in our world.
All right. Well, I suppose that's a whole other show, but it was interesting to hear that. So at the time we're talking about this, you're in the middle of community conversations. And we encourage you to click the link through in the show notes for this episode to see the schedule for that at the city website. But what happens after that, Rebecca, when you've gathered this input? And as you mentioned, you're getting input from consultants and professionals and also the community. What happens after that?
Great question. There's a lot more dialogue to happen. We want to make sure that the feedback that we're getting, we use it to inform next steps. I talked earlier that the city has engaged Cody Newman from Driven Design to help us with the concept drawings that we're sharing at all 6 of the community conversations. Cody is we were intentionally working with Cody. Cody is a Battle Creek native. He's a fantastic architect and has lived here all his life and has a passion for historical preservation, but also doing their best to take older urban core communities and make them vibrant places. So, he's got, I think, the right background and experience and knowledge to help us plan what the new stations could look like going forward, or at least what one new station would look like, and then the renovations and additions we want to do with the others. So we'll take all of that, knowing that these are concept drawings, to see if there's any tweaking that has to happen in those concept drawings before we get in front of the city commission. Ultimately, there's a price tag on all of this, Richard. And, we kind of started with the end in mind when we talked about this. And Rebecca had to go to the finance director and say, hey, I need $40 million to do these fire station projects. And he looked at me and said, yep, I hear that you need that, but this is what the city can afford. And so, he and we went back and forth a little bit and feel that for $25 million, we should be able to do what's being proposed. That being said, this question came up, during our community conversations. We are not looking to raise a millage or go to the vote of the people. This type of bonding, a general obligation bond, can be authorized by the city commission directly. So after the conversations and we get to what looks like, a best first look for the commissioners, we will go into a commissioner workshop. We will get their feedback and any additional public feedback we get, and then we will use that to formulate an official request of the commission to issue a general obligation bond to support these fire station projects. And so that, I can't tell you when that will be. It really will depend on how much information we still have to go through after all our conversations are done, after we've gathered all the online comments that we are asking for. And then we'll have to work again with Cody and his team, Chief Beaty and I, and members of the fire department to make sure we're putting the best package forward for the commission to consider.
You have a target date where you want to have that done?
Well, whenever I say a target date, Richard, I just seem to miss that a little bit. It won't be before July 1. We could maybe get in front of the commission in later June, but we're in our budget season as well. And we really want to see that project. We want to get the budget approved as we are required by law in June. And then plan out, what it looks like from July to, let's say, September 30th, and try to, work within that time frame. What we do know is it takes 90 days to issue a bond once the city commission would authorize us to do so. And then we get to actually, issuing the bond and being able to use the funds. I think what we've been sharing is that if the commission approves us advancing, the closure of Station 3 would be the very last thing, because we have to, and the chief is really good at this, we have to figure out how do you move companies and stations and people so that we're still providing the fire service while things are being done. Cody, I think, has done a really good job in that most of the renovations at the stations, they could continue to work out of them. But we know Station 2 is easy because we are proposing to build a new Station 2, and they can simply build the new 2 and then move 2 over. So, it's a lot of moving pieces, but we should know whether or not we're advancing, by late summer or the early fall. And if we're not, then we will continue to work with the commission about what we need to do in a different fashion or timing things differently. I get it. Going after all of them seems very large. But it gives us a chance, if we are able to address all of them at one time as we're proposing, it sets our new baseline so that we continue then to address them accordingly after, major work.
Yeah, I was thinking about it as you were saying it, the idea that, Chief, this is a big job, right? Trying to manage a transition from an old building to a new one. I don't mean to make light of the work that you and your crew do, but if we just have fun for a second and say, what's the modern thing you really are looking forward to after this is all done, Chief? What is it?
Um, I think my first blush answer would be a breather, but I think the biggest thing for us is giving the firefighters the best space possible for them to live and work. Um, for you, even for Rebecca and me, for that matter. I have a house and I leave it for X number of hours a day. Here lately, it's been about 11 or 12, but I leave it for a time period each day and I come to an office and I do my work and I go home. For the 80 members of the fire department, their work and their home are one in the same place every third day. So there's not that respite. Your house gets a break every day for at least a little while. Rebecca's house, my house, it gets a break from people and things happening for at least a little while every single day. Fire stations do not. So I think for me, the biggest thing to look forward from this is giving those firefighters the best space possible that's the healthiest and most workable and lets us provide the best service we can to our community. I think that's what my biggest hope and takeaway from all of this is.
All right. I imagine that maybe there's a little morale boost in there too. I've been hearing that about hiring, and I was talking to the village manager in Vicksburg. They built a new village hall, and one of the things they talked about was the ability to attract new talent if needed because the facility is new. I imagine this is certainly true in firefighting.
Oh, absolutely. Seeing the city government and the governing body, the elected officials take that step for us. Rebecca's putting herself out there just the same. For all of those entities doing that for us, that's a big boost. And as people are looking at if they want to come here and work and they see that, hey, we're invested in our buildings, which is an investment in our people. We already know that we have quality people. We have great equipment. We're very good at what we do. The men and women here are very, very good at what they do. Outsiders seeing us making this investment in them, it is going to attract that many more people, we believe.
All right. Well, you may be hearing this at a time when a remaining community information session is scheduled and will be happening, in which case you could certainly participate in that. If you are hearing this after that, but you're curious about what might have been talked about, the very first of those sessions is on the city's YouTube channel. So just click through to that from the show notes for this episode, and you're able to watch that. And we certainly are not through talking about this, I'm sure. We'll come back with updates when time permits and when it's necessary. So we thank you both, City Manager Rebecca Fleury and Battle Creek Fire Chief Bill Beaty. Thanks to you.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. We appreciate you giving us the opportunity to speak.